Hey everyone, good evening. I'm Faye Rosenfeld. I am Vice President of Public Programs here at the New York Public Library, and I am delighted to welcome you all to Live from NYPL. Whether you're here in the room or you're joining us online, we're really so glad to have you with us. So if any of you have visited the Polanski exhibition of the library's treasures right upstairs, which is just two floors up from where we're sitting, and if you haven't done that, I really encourage you all to do that, you'll have seen a very large case right in the center of the gallery displaying an extremely rare 1789 manuscript copy of the original Bill of Rights. It's one of only 12 such copies that remain in existence. That 1789 version, which was proposed by James Madison, contained 12 amendments to the Constitution, 10 of which were ultimately ratified as the Bill of Rights in 1791. I mention this because I happened to be looking at this document yesterday when I was showing a visitor around the exhibition, and my eyes went immediately to what was then Amendment 11, now the Ninth Amendment, which states, enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. So I am not an expert on constitutional law, on the Ninth Amendment or the 14th Amendment, and you're certainly not here to listen to me lecture about it. But even as lay people, we all know that it is the job of the Supreme Court to interpret the Constitution and tell us which of our rights, both enumerated and not, are protected and why. And almost exactly 2 years ago to the day in Dobbs versus Jackson, the Supreme Court did something it had never done before in all the years it's been doing that job. It took away an unenumerated but fundamental constitutional right that it previously told us we all had, the right to abortion. The repercussions of that monumental break with precedent for girls, for women, for pregnant people, for families, for all of us are profound and still unfolding, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. We have an extraordinary panel of leaders and experts who will lead us in a conversation about the impact of Dobbs on reproductive rights and where we go from here. They are Lourdes Rivera, President of Pregnancy Justice, which advocates for pregnant people, for the rights of pregnant people, Dr. Meera Shah, a family physician and Chief Medical Officer of Planned Parenthood, Hudson, Peconic, and Reva Siegel, a renowned constitutional law and legal history scholar and the Nicholas D.B. Katzenbach Professor of Law at Yale Law School. We are incredibly lucky to have them and also to have author Jessica Bruder with us to moderate tonight's conversation. Jessica recently completed a fellowship at the Cullman Center for Scholars and Writers right here at the library, where she worked on her forthcoming book about mutual aid and abortion access. And those of us who are fans of her previous books, including the incredible book Nomadland, are eagerly awaiting the publication of her next one. You can find all of their full bios in your printed programs or on the event listing on the website. They'll have a conversation for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions from all of you. When you came in, hopefully you all got a little note card with a pencil. You can write your questions down on that note card, and someone from our wonderful staff will come around and collect those questions during the program. And if you're watching us online, you can just drop your question into the chat, or you can send us an email at publicprograms@nypl.org, and they'll be glad to take as many questions as they can. Before I bring our panelists on stage, I'm going to mention that we have one more Live from NYPL season left, and then Live from NYPL left in our season before we meet again in September. It is on July 9th. Taffy Brodesser-Ackner, the author of Fleischman is in Trouble, will be back at Live with her new novel, Long Island Compromise, and she'll be in conversation with the New York Times Magazine's editor-in-chief, Jake Silverstein. You can register for that at nypl.org/live. And we really hope to see you there. Lastly, Live from NYPL is made possible by the generosity of our donors, including Celeste Bartos, Manazi Spahani Bartos, and Adam Bartos, and of course all of you, our wonderful supporters and friends. I'm sure you all have heard that the library is facing very, very severe budget cuts, the most drastic cuts that we've faced in decades, and your support means more to us than ever. So thank you for that. Thank you for being here, and please welcome our speakers.
Hello. Well, thank you all for coming out on this very sultry evening. Thanks to Faye for the kind introduction and to the New York Public Library for hosting us in this magnificent building. It's a pleasure to be here with these three fantastic people this evening. I'm here to facilitate, so I want, again, if you want to jump in on the end of the things that other folks have to say, if you want to ask each other questions too, again, if it becomes a complete melee or fracas, I guess I stand up and I don't think there's going to be a fight, but you never know, right? Here we are. Here we are 2 years and 2 days to the dot after Dobbs. It's the second Dobbs anniversary. And we're at the point where 14 states have banned abortion at all stages of pregnancy. 3 have banned it at approximately 6 weeks or later, which is, for many people, is before they realize they're pregnant. So we know all that. We've been following all that. And when I think about the situation right now, I actually have these kind of moments where I think of COVID and how COVID wreaked a lot of havoc. But one of the things it did was it also laid bare a lot of systemic problems that have been going on for a very, very long time that needed broader acknowledgement. And I see this with Dobbs as well. So I'm hoping we can start with just a little bit of history in that Dobbs, yes, has wreaked a lot of havoc, but also revealed a lot of problems that are systemic and endemic, things that a physician might call pre-existing conditions. So Lourdes, there was something you mentioned when we spoke on the phone last week. You talked a little bit about how you got involved in the fantastic work that you do and what it was about learning about your mother's generation and that history that really ignited something in you. Can you share that a little bit with us?
Sure, and I think that what you were referring to is that Roe. It was an important legal protection, but it left a lot of people without access, right? It was not sufficient. It became a ceiling when it was supposed to be a floor. But there's a long history of reproductive oppression in this country. I grew up in a Puerto Rican family where 1/3 of my mother's generation was sterilized without informed consent. And that was an experience of other women of color. In the South, it was called a Mississippi appendectomy. On the West Coast, Chicana women and indigenous women. So it's a history throughout our country. But also, my grandmother was born in the southern coast of Puerto Rico, and it was just about 20 years after slavery. And she was someone, she had about 15 pregnancies and 10 children who were born and 9 that grew up into adulthood. So she was someone who, she loved all her children, of course, but I just had to think about, what if she had options? What if she had the ability to make decisions for her own reproductive destiny, right? I think her life would have been very different. And of course, I love all my cousins. Some of them are watching, so, But I just, all of these experiences, and I also grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, which was one of the ground zeros for the war on drugs during the 1980s, where Black women in particular, but Puerto Rican women and women of color were targeted for pregnancy criminalization. And what I mean by pregnancy criminalization is being targeted for actions that other people would not be targeted for, to be criminalized for actions because you harmed your fetus or you harmed your embryo. And that was what was happening to Black women who had substance use disorder, who were using crack cocaine, and with this narrative that was very disparaging of the women, and then also their babies, who were quote unquote crack babies that were supposed to be dependent on the state indefinitely. And of course, that never materialized because it was based on a lie. But all of these experiences really led me to this place of leading Pregnancy Justice, which is an organization that for 20 years has defended and advocated for the rights and humanity of pregnant people, regardless of whether they have an abortion, a miscarriage, a stillbirth, or having taken their pregnancies to term.
Yeah, this is one, it's funny. The moderator doesn't get to name the panel, but I was really happy to see that the panel was called Protecting Reproductive Freedoms rather than just abortion, right? Because when you bring this up, it brings a reproductive justice lens to the conversation. All right, well, I can't see our internet home audience, but can we get a show of hands? Who's familiar with reproductive justice in here? Okay, so we've got a chunk. Well, just so we can all be in the same place, can I throw it out to one of you three to give us the line on RJ?
So reproductive justice is a framework that was first articulated by Black women in the reproductive health and rights movement, and it's defined as the right to bodily autonomy, the right to have a child, not just the right to not have a child, and the right to raise our children in safe and sustainable environments.
Sure, so the idea is, again, just having access to abortion isn't enough. Coming into a community and just saying that is not, there's a whole palette. So let's go to the present now, because I know the first thing that we were talking about in the green room, and some of you may have been kind of following as well. Again, show of hands, who saw the Supreme Court glitch today? Leaky court. All right, so some didn't. So again, who wants to catch up the room on the strange thing that happened today? Somebody's itchy trigger finger. Reva, you got this?
We can start this. So basically, the court is owing us still a good number of opinions, many opinions, though it normally ends the term by Friday. It may not, we don't know. But today was just a short hand-down day. It's part of the court's practice not to say which cases it's handing down. And so there were just 2 opinions this morning. And we went on with our days, didn't we go on with our days? And then sometime in the afternoon, suddenly a news, somewhere on X or otherwise, there was news that, in fact, the court had begun to post an opinion and then taken it down immediately, and someone had managed to save a copy of the opinion. That opinion is one of the cases we're still waiting for, the second of the court's abortion cases this term, and it concerns the question of how federal law governing care in emergency rooms in hospitals intersects with state laws that ban abortion. If state laws ban abortion in more restrictive terms, in what respects, if at all, does this federal law limit the most severe abortion bans in a state like Idaho, the state in which this litigation began? And it's a very strange scene because the court already decided that one of its cases, the one involving medication abortion, the abortion pills case, was badly litigated and judged, and so it dismissed it and sent it back down for maybe some other group to bring it again. We don't know, so the threat is not gone, but the court did not, in fact, restrict FDA authorization of abortion pills. So similarly, it appears, though we don't yet have a final judgment from the court, it's not officially released the opinion, that at least the court seems to be getting ready to say, as to the second of its abortion decisions, that this case shouldn't have taken the case as soon as it did, that it needed to have a more developed factual record in the states. During argument, there was a fascinating scene in which the justices, almost regardless of party of appointment or the president who appointed them, divided along gender lines in asking questions of the lawyer from Idaho about what exactly is Idaho, what kinds of emergency care is the state banning. And in particular, we saw Justice Barrett get extremely irritated with the lawyer from Idaho because she was being told there were no conflicts between the federal ER law and Idaho's ban, and instead she had read otherwise, or they thought they had seen otherwise in the record. So we may be seeing this case dismissed as having been taken too soon. However, we don't yet have a final opinion. There is no official opinion yet. Somebody grabbed a screenshot. The Bloomberg News has a copy of the opinion that got circulated in the afternoon, but it's not the official opinion.
Somebody was clicking refresh.
Exactly. So it's not the same story as the leak that happened 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago. But we don't know why they took it down. They may just want to finish writing or adding an opinion, or we don't know.
You've noted it wasn't formatted yet. Wasn't formatted.
I think that Bloomberg distributed it in a way to make it clear it wasn't official.
Got it.
That's my assumption. We assume they sat and debated what to do with this for a while before releasing it. But
okay, so everybody who's following reproductive rights and is just kind of eagle-eyed on the Supreme Court has been waiting to find out if they would bar access to mifepristone, one of the two types of pills that are commonly used together for a medication abortion. And again, if this case out of Idaho, what they would do with it, basically. Are they going to say you cannot perform emergency abortions? In both of these cases, it's funny, Reva, in the beginning you were saying, well, if you ask a question and I don't want to answer it, can I say skip? And I kind of feel like that's what the Supreme Court just did. They said skip. What is that about? Anybody?
it starts with E.
I'd like to buy a vowel.
L.
Election.
Election.
Thank you.
Election. Not a vowel, but
Not a vowel. Consonant.
No, no. That is, we just observed that they took two cases, neither of which had to be heard before the election. I won't get into the details. And many of us said, why are they so hungry for these cases, and especially right before the election? And then they kept taking more cases, the Trump cases and more, and there's the internet today also. And some of the big cases they took, they are deciding to not decide right now. And so it appears, if this draft holds, that they may be deciding not to decide right now, which is not the same thing as saying that the federal law prevails, just to be really clear. And there's what appears to be a dissent in part from Justice Jackson saying, everyone, let's be really clear. They could have been clear now, and they're not doing that. So there is this question of why take two of these cases in the lead up to the election, and then on procedural grounds, which they didn't have to take before the election, although they were going to get involved in the end. Why take them and then not decide them before the election? Question mark. That's just not a legal analysis. That's a question mark.
Oops. So one of the things that, again, when I think about these issues, and sometimes it's a little frustrating because we're here in New York, and I'm sure, if you came all the way out here in this staggering heat, I'm going to assume you care about reproductive freedom. That may be presumptuous. Oh well, I got the mic. But I still, and I'm guessing you still may encounter some people too who say, well, we're here in New York. New York is a blue state. This is a case coming out of Idaho. That's a case coming out of Texas. Do you know what I mean? We're okay. And I think some of our guests might have something to say to that. But in particular, I'd like to tap you, Meera, because Meera, working in New York now, but before Dobbs traveled to South Bend, Indiana every month to provide abortions there. Hasn't since the ban there took hold and the clinic is closed. But even here in New York, it sounds like what you are seeing on the ground, whether it's patients, protesters, just the scene in general, may be a little different these days. And can you tell us how?
Yes, I can tell you all the things on the ground that are happening. It's really, layered in that right around Dobbs, we knew for a long time that it was going to happen. So we were mentally prepared. I mean, it didn't make that easier when the announcement was made. It was still pretty hard. I actually was flying to Indiana at the time and had a layover in Charlotte, missed it, had to stay the night. The next morning, I was on a standby flight. I had 40 patients on my schedule in South Bend. and was begging the woman. I was like, is there anything you can do? I really need to get on this flight. I ended up getting on, but right around 10 a.m., I all of a sudden hear cheers at the Charlotte airport. And I look over and I see a group of what appeared to be men, white, looking at a TV and cheering. And I knew, and I looked at my phone, and I was just getting text message after text message after text message because I knew that the announcement had been made. I continued on with my trip, saw all the patients. Kentucky had a trigger ban in place, so patients were calling our clinic in hopes that they could get care because their appointments had been canceled. I said, yes, come on, if you can get here, I'll take care of you. And then since then, we tried to keep our clinic open for a while. It was going back and forth in the courts if abortion was going to be banned. The final decision 8 months later was that abortion is now banned in the state, and so we ended up having to close our clinic. We tried to stay open as a safe space for pregnant people to come for ultrasounds, pregnancy confirmation, just kind of guidance on where to go get care. I just want everybody to know that this whole idea that people can travel is not as true as it may seem. Not everybody can travel. In fact, most people can't travel. The majority of people are, if they can and have even the resources to do so, are sourcing pills online. And that has been shown through very vigorous studies in which my centers have participated in. That is proved to be safe. I know a lot of my friends and, physician colleagues were concerned about the safety of self-sourced abortion, but we now know that it is very safe to do so, and planc.org is a great place to go for more information regarding that. That said, there were some people who want to still get care in a health center, or they have to get care in a health center because of medical complications or because of how far along they are. And so, we in New York, we're seeing an influx and still are seeing an influx of patients from other states. We operate on a need-to-know basis, so I don't ask every patient where they are coming from. People will give a local address oftentimes because they're scared of being criminalized. But it'll come up in conversation. Just today, I had a patient from Georgia who had come to see us for a medication abortion. I will tell you, patients are coming to us later in their pregnancy because they have had a hard time, collecting the money to take the flight and, either stay in a hotel or figure out another arrangement. The good thing is that a lot of people know people in New York, right? So that's why it's become sort of this hub for folks to get abortion care. And there's a lot of flights coming in and out from all over the country. Or patients are coming in as soon as they have a positive pregnancy test. Now, when patients have a positive pregnancy test very early, oftentimes we don't see anything on the ultrasound. We don't see a pregnancy on the ultrasound. In most cases, that means that the pregnancy is early, but in a fraction of cases, that means that the pregnancy could be outside of the uterus and it could be an ectopic. Now, the interesting thing is that we've had almost a dozen patients in probably the last 6 months, and I get wind of all of them because I am the medical director and I oversee 12 health centers, and so anytime there is an ectopic, I'm alerted of it. And we have seen people travel to us for medication abortion, right after they take that first pregnancy test, and they just book it from Georgia, Louisiana, wherever they are to get care. And we give them the medications, and we also draw a blood test to track the completion of the abortion. So we'll do a blood test in-house in New York, and then give them a script for a blood test to complete in their hometown or wherever they go back to. What we have found is in about a dozen cases that patients have an ectopic pregnancy, but they're already in their state where care is a little iffy. I'll never forget the patient that I saw who was from Florida, and I called her. I was on call that weekend. I got the blood test result, and I said, I'm really concerned that you have an ectopic. I would like for you to go to the emergency room.
Can I pause you? Can you just,
Yeah.
I know you breezed through ectopic
Yeah.
really quickly, but could
Yeah.
you just for anybody in the room who doesn't know what an ectopic pregnancy is?
Absolutely. So an ectopic pregnancy is a pregnancy that's outside of the uterus. A pregnancy that is healthy and viable should grow inside of the uterus. One that is ectopic is one that grows outside of the uterus.
How did it get there?
How did it get there? It traveled there. So an egg is released from the ovary. The sperm meets the egg, becomes a blastocyst, an embryo, and then it's supposed to travel down the fallopian tube and then kind of deposit itself into the uterus and implant into the uterine wall. But the most ectopics, when they do occur, will not make it out of the fallopian tube. So that's the most common site for an ectopic pregnancy. And so this patient, when in Florida, I called the emergency room. I talked to the physician. He seemed totally on board with the plan. I said, she needs methotrexate, or if you see the pregnancy like on ultrasound, then in the fallopian tube, surgical management, whatever, but at baseline she needs methotrexate. He said, yeah, I agree, et cetera, et cetera. If I follow up the next day with the patient just to check and see how she's doing, she said, oh, well, they let me go because the doctor said he said that the laws in the state were confusing. So they just let me go. And I said, oh my gosh. I said, well, no, let's find you another hospital, and that's all I could think to do. And she said, no, you know what? I'm getting right back on the plane and coming back to New York. She flew back to New York, came to us, and we sent her to the hospital. I called up my friend, and she got care. I mean, that is what we're dealing with, regardless of what's happening in SCOTUS. People are still confused about, and I'm not saying that this doctor was anti or whatnot. He could have been totally on board, but was genuinely confused because now physicians are worried about being criminalized, right, for giving care to patients. It's a really complicated kind of scene out there with regards to what we can and can't do.
Is there a word for laws that just work by confusing people, or the effect of
Chill. It's called chill. In other words, if you are operating possibly within the reach of the criminal law, and that criminal law will exact terrible penalties if you're held to have violated it, it will make you think twice before you act. So one of the things that is happening right now is that abortion states, ban states where it's not lawful to end a pregnancy, for a physician to end a pregnancy, have exceptions in the law for urgent health needs, life-saving, which have been interpreted differently over time. And I believe Idaho in the EMTALA case, actually it was ambiguous, but probably the case that the doctors were not cleared by the state Supreme Court in Idaho to take the act that you're describing there. And eventually the list of life-threatening conditions where it was unclear if doctors could intervene was long enough that even in Idaho, the state legislature amended their ban law to add certain clear list of procedures, but not all, to the exception. And the opponents of abortion actually debate what an abortion is because they think of it as a wrongful termination, and they're actually divided about which terminations are wrongful, depending on the extent of the threat that they pose to people who are pregnant. So,
And just to say, like, management of an ectopic pregnancy is not considered an abortion. We don't categorize that an abortion. Once someone is diagnosed with an ectopic pregnancy, that's a whole nother kind of chapter. It's like, the patient needs very unique management that we don't do for our patients who have an intrauterine pregnancy wanting to end that pregnancy.
But the person involved will worry in a banned state whether that person will be subject to criminal penalty. And that's because, I'm sure.
It depends.
Go right ahead.
It depends which state. because in some states, if there's a fetal heartbeat, right, which there is no heart, but there's like some
Hence
cardiac
air quotes on
pulse,
fetal
Cardiac
heartbeat.
activity.
there's a cardiac pulse or activity, right, that's detected. Sometimes you get that, you can detect that in a ectopic pregnancy. That pregnancy is not eligible for an abortion or for a pregnancy termination, depending on the state and the state law. So it is confusing, but because there are actually real risks to both the patient and provider if they go through with the procedure.
And
so
chill happens if there's a difference in
Right.
opinion between the doctor
Yeah.
and the prosecutor.
So you have lawyers making decisions about whether or not somebody should be eligible for an emergency medical procedure in these states. So, but I need to back up and talk about what is the law that we were just talking about that the Supreme Court just leaked and then pulled back the opinion about. It's the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act, which was a law that was adopted in the 1980s that was meant to prevent hospitals that receive federal funding like Medicare or Medicaid from dumping people who didn't have health insurance, right? So, there were poor people, poor women, poor pregnant women in active labor who were having their babies in the parking lot. And this federal law was meant to provide a floor to protect access to emergency medical treatment. And the law requires that there's intervention to prevent someone's health from deteriorating, to stabilize them, right, before they can be transferred or something like that. What Idaho and these abortion ban states are arguing is that it's okay to force pregnant people, pregnant women, to have to go deteriorate to the point of facing death, and then you can pull them back from the brink of death, right? Because of this idea of fetal personhood, because of this idea that there's a second patient here, which is the embryo or the fetus. So in order for the person who's carrying the pregnancy to get emergency medical treatment, and in some cases that is provision of an abortion, to terminate the pregnancy, to prevent their health from deteriorating, to prevent from getting septic, to prevent an ectopic pregnancy from bursting, right? That's what EMTALA does. And, but these states are arguing that, there's a second person here. And, we have to treat that second person as having separate legal rights from the pregnant person.
Your fetus has a lawyer.
Your fetus has a lawyer. And that's no joke, because some of the cases that we intervene in, because again, the cases that we intervene in, even while Roe is in place, is pregnant people becoming criminalized for allegations or perceived harms to fetuses or embryos or fertilized eggs, right? In some of the cases, particularly in the family regulation context, the fetuses get lawyers, not the pregnant person. So this is really, it's just gone amok.
It's so crazy. I remember 5 days, some of you may remember, this made international news, 5 days after the Dobbs decision dropped. There was that case in Texas where somebody got pulled over and ticketed, and she said, "You can't give me a ticket because I'm in the carpool lane because I'm pregnant. There's two of us," and everybody, is like, ha, 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 is this an Onion story or what? What it was might have been a preview to total dystopia and actually a reflection of stuff that was going on already that people didn't realize. I remember half of the people I talked to thought it was something that Jon Stewart made up, and the other half were like, no, this is actually a harbinger of something that's going to happen. So speaking of harbingers, because time goes terrifyingly fast. Again, we know it's in the post-COVID era, it's either molasses or it's lightning. I'm going to do, let's not call it a lightning round because that's a little game show. But if we could keep answers tight, just because I know I want to unleash the audience on you all as well. I'd like it, and I'll share it all now just because then you can think about it while other people are answering. I'd love it if each of you could share something that you think is one of the looming threats that keeps you up at night. I mean, I guess we just did fetal personhood. You could jump on that again if you want. I'm thinking about 19th century anti-vice laws that are getting revived. I'm thinking, there's so many things. So one thing that keeps you up at night, and if you can explain it, and then after that, we'll do something that gives you hope. Can we do that? Is anybody ready? Reva's always ready.
Okay. I have lots of things that keep me up at night.
I know, you got to pick one, though.
Okay, so when the court on December 13th took the case involving the abortion pills, the first of the cases that it took this year, that case was a challenge to whether the Food and Drug Administration had properly authorized 20 years ago and in subsequent decisions properly authorized access to the medication for these purposes. But they had a second claim in that case, and that claim was that, however the first question was answered, there's an old law on the books. It's an old postal obscenity law called the Comstock Act, and that law, they claimed, the person behind SB 8 and the shutdown in Texas before Dobbs argued that old obscenity law, which covered pictures and items and things in 1873, including managing the mailing of matters for the prevention of conception and for unlawful abortion, that law, which was only partly repealed, they argued, could be used to ban mailing of anything that would enable or assist in an abortion. There, the focus was on the medication abortion, but conceivably, given the reading of the statute, it could extend to anything that would facilitate any form of termination.
It could be a speculum, right?
Right,
I mean, it could be
anything. So, and that claim had not been particularly responded to in the general public arena, although the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department had issued a statement earlier in response to these emerging claims that the law should be interpreted in such a way that would actually require a showing that the sender intended the items mailed to be used for unlawful purposes. I'll skip all of that to say that the right has been opposing that interpretation. And that claim was raised in the argument by Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF, on the argument for the abortion pills case. Alito and Thomas talked about it in argument when the court dismissed the case as wanting standing. Skip that. The claim seemed to go away, but it's not gone. So a reason to keep it up at night is that the folks who are supporting the next Republican administration in something called Project 2025, have people heard of this? Are planning to, have included plans to enforce their understanding, their abusive misinterpretation of the Comstock Act in a next Republican administration. And the people who drafted the relevant chapters played an enormous role in blocking access to every form of reproductive health care in the last Trump administration. So that is my item number one. And you asked before, would people around the country be at risk? This law, they're interpreting as a nationwide, no exceptions ban on mailing so that it wouldn't provide for any of the exceptions we're
Zombie
talking
law
about
is
here.
coming for your blue states.
Okay, so that's at stake in whether and how people vote
Okay,
in
lightning
this coming
round.
election. Sorry.
Lightning.
I
I'm
was
gonna get
waiting
struck by
to,
lightning.
I thought it was very important to
It
put
is
that out
very
there.
important. It's all very important. That's the problem.
There's a paper called Comstockery, which I have written with Mary Ziegler, that gives the history of this wild law.
worth reading. It's really kind of bonkers, actually. All right.
Lots of things that keep me up at night. I'm going to double down on fetal personhood because, and I'm going to answer both questions at the same time. What gives me a lot of hope is that people are paying attention. The ballot initiatives are a really bright spot in all of this. And what keeps me up at night is this long-term plan of getting fetal personhood recognized as under our Constitution and laws. And if that happens, it doesn't matter how many states pass these ballot initiatives protecting abortion rights. Because if fetuses are people, right? Not the pregnant person being a person, but if fetuses are people, then we're seeing this could happen in Alabama shortly. Ballot initiative in Florida. We'll see what happens with that in the November election, but that state Supreme Court is poised to say, yeah, sorry, because fetuses are people. So that keeps me up at night.
Yes, me too.
Yeah.
All right, Meera, what keeps you up at night?
A lot of things. So as a physician, my definition of, certain aspects of sexual and reproductive health care clearly don't matter. So it feels like, the example that I gave was an ectopic pregnancy. I told you exactly what the medical definition was, but then there's all this free interpretation, which is super frustrating. What keeps me up at night is thoughts of my beautiful, wonderful clinic in South Bend, Indiana, that we had to shut down, and we were serving so many patients in the area. The thought of the election going south and, New York not being able to provide abortion care to New Yorkers and others around the country, that would be terribly scary. What gives me hope is the work that we're doing now, expanding medication abortion to 12 weeks. We just did that last week. My clinics are expanding procedural abortion up to 24 weeks. My full-time job is the chief medical officer of Planned Parenthood in New York. I oversee all those health centers, but then I'm also the medical director of a new clinic in Petersburg, Virginia. So it'll serve patients from North Carolina and Virginia, and our first day of clinic is next month. Super excited about that. So we're doing whatever we can. We're not stopping until they tell us we can't. And so these are the things that give me hope, and I've just put my heart and my soul into in hopes that we can continue the work.
Thank you. Reva, have you hope? You can also just say no.
Yes, I do. It's because of the speak outs that are going on now and the resistance that we're seeing. In fact, we have a clear understanding that abortion banning is part of democratic dysfunction, that the American people want access to reproductive care, to have families, and to decide how and with whom they are going to have and raise families. It gets clearer and clearer by the day, but we need to save our democracy. And so that's a long and an intergenerational project. It's not one that's going to be decided only in an election, no matter which way this goes. It actually requires speaking out. It requires telling stories. It requires reading on the right. And it requires believing in the fact that there's actually there's supermajority support for something that the Supreme Court is not yet prepared to recognize.
Well, that actually transitioned beautifully into some news you can use. Is there anything, if you wanted people in this room to take away at least one thing that they could do to promote reproductive freedoms, to promote them or prevent the further erosion thereof, can you share some of that with us?
I have a list.
I know you do.
I have a list. And one of the things that gives me hope, again, is that there's so many more people who are with us and paying attention. But even with that, one of the things that you can do, and tell your friends and anybody who would listen, that the fight is beyond abortion. It's about abortion, but it's so much more than abortion. It's about who is going to be recognized fully as, a sentient, full being that is entitled to make their own decisions under our laws, right? And who's entitled to have access. So that is, what the fight is about. It's about democracy. It's very connected to democracy. Donate to abortion funds and to organizations like ours that are in this fight. So that's to independent clinics. So donate to them. You can sign up for Pregnancy Justice's newsletter to keep up on the issues. Resist fetal personhood being embedded in law. This is not about how pregnant people feel about this is my baby. And people can, they can think of this is my baby. They can think it's a pumpkin, a peanut, I've heard it all. And this is not about how we think about our pregnancies. This is about endowing fetuses with separate legal rights in opposition to the person who's carrying the pregnancy. This is what we're talking about. There's a New York ERA on the ballot, so,
Turn the ballot over, turn the ballot over.
Yes. And there's also a New York Informed Consent Coalition that's advocating for New York to pass law that protects individuals in healthcare settings that they would have to give informed consent before they can get drug tested. Because what happens then, even in a state like New York, people get then reported to law enforcement or they get reported to the family regulation system. And I can tell you it's not the ladies who lunch who are getting tested and reported. So it's, it's targeted against communities of color.
Yeah. So to add to that, do all of this, all of the above, plus if you would like to donate to work that's being done on the ground, our clinic in Petersburg, like I said, brand new, Whole Women's Health Alliance. You can donate to the clinic expansion program and just write in Petersburg. We need all the support we can get, and we're really excited to open our doors.
All right, now we will open our doors to questions from the audience. First up, and again, anybody can field this, and it probably shouldn't be everybody because, again, we are on the tick-tock clock. So what are the biggest threats to youth particularly right now that you're seeing? If you want to take that in an abortion context, I'm instantly thinking of minors and travel, but take it where you want if you want to grab it.
That's a really big question. So first, the attacks on gender-affirming care in some states, that's a really big issue. In the context of abortion, all of the, requiring, even while Roe was in place, like all the hurdles that young people had to overcome to get access to abortion, and sometimes having to go to a judge to ask for permission. So that's, that's an issue. And frankly, what our young people get to learn in school about, just the attacks on the curriculum that they have access to, right? And so everything from learning about our actual history on race in this country, and learning about gender diversity and all of these things. So I think that, there are a lot of things that young people are facing right now and that we need to fight against.
Thank you. Okay, does anybody on the panel know how abortion bans have affected people with developmental disabilities?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. I knew you'd have it.
Developmental disabilities, minors, trans non-binary people, many categories of folks, having trouble accessing care, traveling, getting pills on the internet. All of it. They're essentially groups that are trapped and forced to continue pregnancies against their will because of these bans.
You basically just have to think about your point about whether someone's whether people are respected in their decision making or not. And the less someone is respected in their decision making, the more that this regulatory regime is out to control, and the usual mechanism of control is the criminal law.
Yeah, it is true. Okay, there was one. What successes have you experienced when communicating with somebody opposed to reproductive justice?
I can talk about this.
Oh, please.
So from an advocacy perspective, I think, if someone is vehemently opposed to abortion and comes from it with really, really strong views, I always recommend just sort of saving your energy for those who are at least willing to listen. And for those who are willing to listen and to hear you, sharing stories is really impactful. Data is also really impactful. We have really, really good data to support why abortion access is important. The Turnaway study is incredible. A colleague of mine did that study and published a book of her findings. Highly recommended.
Can you tell them what a turnaway situation is?
Yeah, so it was basically, the study was designed to study people who went to a clinic to get an abortion but were turned away for whatever reason, whether it be they couldn't pay, they were too far, they couldn't get back to the clinic because of a waiting period, which is totally unnecessary and not founded in science, but a lot of states have imposed that. And so the Turnaway study, again, highly recommend. It's a collection of all of the research findings along with stories, and it's a really impactful way to kind of share your knowledge. If you have a personal story, by no means are you, should you feel like you have to share it, but if you do, I guarantee those around you will feel that, and it'll change the way that they think. I guarantee it.
I saw that finger flickering.
Yeah, 100% storytelling, speaking out, telling your own stories, or actually working through the facts with people matters enormously, because a lot of people's judgments are embedded in other stories, so you have to destabilize them. But the thing I wanted to point to, which to me is quite important, is to show that so many of the banned states, most of the banned states, and the advocates for fetal personhood view the whole business of caring for antenatal life as using the criminal law to punish people. And what's remarkable to me is the fact that the states that have the bans at a policy level provide the worst access to sex ed, to contraceptive access, to health care access, to social assistance for family or work family accommodations. There's actually a red state and a blue state way of caring for the next generation. And what always amazes me is that the states that are really having the appetite to criminalize have so little interest in anyone else sticking out a pinky to help anyone who might want to carry a pregnancy to term, who might need that assistance or otherwise. And I actually find that getting in that conversation, I also write on guns and the Second Amendment, so there's also that angle on things, but just simply doing what I call expanding the frame and pointing out to people that when you look at this question, you shouldn't only focus on the pregnant person's decisions, or for that matter, on their womb, but you should expand the frame and look at the structural question of who's helping who do what, and are we helping people realize their choices, or are we actually depriving them of the ability to make certain choices for life and care and punishing them for not doing what it is we think they should do. I find that conversation actually a really productive one to be in.
And this opens it up a little bit more too. I'll bet this is going to work. How do we reframe the conversation about reproductive rights and freedom to combat the misinformation around abortions?
That's a great question. And, demonstrating the overlap between states with punitive approaches, including abortion bans and pregnancy criminalization, tend to have the highest maternal mortality rates, infant and newborn mortality rates. So that's one thing. On the personal level, just to answer the prior question before I get into that, I also find effective just acknowledging that people have conflicting feelings about abortion, and that is okay, right? That is okay. And I also find the reproductive justice frame that it's not just about ending pregnancy, but it's also about supporting people who want to have children, right, and to raise their children, right? So all of this, that is reproductive justice.
All mosaic of possibilities.
It is all of this, right? And so I've had personal experiences with people very uncomfortable with abortion can get on board with reproductive justice. So I think that there's a difference, and I agree. There's some people who are just, you're never going to reach them, and that, it's like, okay, we'll agree to disagree.
So go for the swing voters is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And
Or
also,
talk about contraception. A lot of people who can't get behind abortion can get behind contraception access, and that is being threatened as well.
Yeah, next on the list.
Yeah.
right.
So that's a topic to talk about.
Speaking of which, on a bright note, you told us about that little trendlet you were experiencing even today.
Yes, as I was doing vasectomies today in clinic, which is why I came straight from clinic, like running from the train station. That's why I'm wearing my scrubs. But yes, we provide the full spectrum of sexual reproductive health care at Planned Parenthood. We see prenatal patients, we see abortion patients, we do vasectomies, trans non-binary care, all of it. And we were talking beforehand about how we have seen an uptick in vasectomies, patients requesting vasectomies since Dobbs. And many people were inspired to sort of do their part and get a vasectomy, and that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about commitment on the things you can do question.
Yeah. And vasectomies are not reversible. I just want to put in a plug for that.
All right, so let's try to target this last question. We have 4 minutes. We are down to the wire. How do we reframe the conversation about reproductive rights and freedom to combat misinformation around abortion? So I guess what's the worst misinformation we're seeing, and how do we reframe it around that?
Well, can we talk about fake clinics?
Oh, yes.
I love
pregnancy
talking about
crisis centers.
Yes.
They get an enormous amount of our tax dollars.
Can you tell them what crisis pregnancy centers are, please?
So they're basically anti-abortion, like storefronts that often set up next to the Planned Parenthoods and independent clinics to confuse people. They offer ultrasounds. People with white coats.
Diapers.
They give free
Formula.
diapers and formula. That's to the extent that they provide care. They collect your personal information, and then they help surveil you.
Are they doctors? They're wearing white coats.
No, they're not. These are not medical people. They're there to give you misinformation.
How do they get away with it?
First Amendment.
Yeah, I mean, they have, they say it's a First Amendment right, and,
Many are federally funded.
and so.
And pre-Dobbs, there was a 6-to-1 ratio of 6 fake clinics to 1 actual real clinic. And post-Dobbs, I don't know what that is, but it's definitely skewed because they've been allowed to persist and exist and expand. We have them in New York. People don't realize that. And if there's not like a brick and mortar next to a clinic, then there's like a mobile van that'll pull up. There's one in our Spring Valley clinic in Rockland County, and it's a mobile van, and it'll pull up to our clinic, and then people will stand outside and say, come get your free ultrasound. Well, free healthcare sounds great to anybody, right? So patients go in. Patients are smart. Like, they get that something's up. This isn't a real place to get health care. And because what will happen is they'll give an ultrasound image that sometimes, they don't all do this, but many of them do this. They'll give an ultrasound image to the patient that's not actually theirs. It'll be further along or like earlier than what they think. And the patient knows, like, my last menstrual period was, on this day. And so this doesn't seem right. And then they'll write on the ultrasound, hi, mommy, or, hi. And what, the interesting thing, though, is that there was a study that showed, like, who was actually going to these clinics, like who, and what they found was that it was actually people just wanting free formula and diapers. It wasn't people who were actually getting tricked. Some people definitely are, because there was a fake clinic across the street from my clinic in South Bend, and we are Whole Women's Health Alliance, and they were Women's Health Center. So yeah, that's confusing. And patients would go there because it was literally right across the street. Actually, they tried to open up next door, but Buttigieg wouldn't give them the permit to open up. And so they ended up going across the street, and it was like a 4-lane highway, so a little bit of distance. But the patients would sometimes be late to their appointment at our clinic because they're like, I'm so sorry, I went across the street because I thought, that's where I was supposed to go. And then but they did an ultrasound and this is what they gave me. And I'm like, I don't trust that. And so we have to repeat their care. But that's the sort of stuff that they do, and it's awful.
And again, your tax dollars.
Yeah.
Right, and TANF money. Some states, they
Explain
divert, so
what
TANF is cash assistance for poor families, it's like the new branding for welfare, right? But people need this money for their subsistence and their families. So states are diverting money from the TANF program and giving it to these fake clinics instead of to the families. So it's really, I want like this whole strategy of follow the money just to expose it. And some of these pregnancy crisis centers are then going global. They're using our US tax dollars and then going global and taking these clinics, these fake clinics to other countries.
One thing you can do is if you have seen a fake clinic, go to their Yelp page or their Google page and just write all over it that this is fake, this is not real, don't go here.
Because they're really good at SEO. Sorry,
Yeah.
I should be jumping in, but sometimes they get, I know people who've looked for a clinic and they get 3 CPCs before they get a clinic.
Oh,
too.
yeah,
So-
definitely. And I mean, we do our work too and try to get, higher up on the search, but they sometimes, win because they've got the money.
Okay, so Meera's giving you a civil disobedience assignment. There are procedures that can happen. You are armed. You are ready. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. If you could thank our wonderful speakers. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for being engaged.